So what we're actually talking about is Genesis 14, also known as the 4 Kings verses 5. And I find this to be a very fascinating story because this is roughly, I believe, about 400 or so years after the flood has taken place. Life has began to repopulate on the earth. There are nations that are starting to grow. And the big event that has just taken place is the incident at the Tower of Babel with the dispersion of tongues. So in Genesis 10, we see Nimrod as the world power. We see him building this tower known as the Tower of Babel, but the actual name of it is the Tower Etymonanke. It's a ziggurat, and it is one of many ziggurats. It's not the only one. It's probably not even the biggest one. The Bible doesn't say that it was the biggest one. The Bible said that they wanted to build a tower whose top was in the heavens. And basically that is symbolism that is pointing to the fact that they are looking for a temple, which is supposed to be a portal between heaven and earth. So that's what Nimrod is doing here at Etymonanke. And ultimately he fails. And I believe that's where we get Psalm 82, where God is in the council and he's talking to the sons of God who have rebelled against him and says, you call yourselves God, but you will die like men. And there's other places, I believe in Deuteronomy 31, maybe 28, where he talks about separating the peoples according to the numbers of the sons of God. So how that happens is obviously before the flood, you've got the watchers. There's 200 of them on Mount Hermon who came down. They led men astray, and then they faced a judgment. But there is one of two things either happened. Either more fallen angels rebelled later, or some of these fallen angels did not receive their full due punishment and were allowed to survive later on. The Tower of Babel, the construction of it, the progress of it comes to a complete halt because God looks down and says that they can do anything that they want to do. Therefore, let's go down and confound their language so that they won't understand each other. He does. And now they can't work on one enterprise and they go in different directions. So the result of this is the rise of other empires such as Egypt, which just popped up overnight in a lot of ways because I believe they took with them a lot of the wicked and evil oracles. But then Nimrod was the first world potentate. So a lot of the vassal kingdoms that are under him begin to vie for power. And one of those vassals that was under him was Chedolaomer. His actual name is Chedorlaomer, and his name actually means servant of Lagomer. Lagomer being an underworld deity. The name means no mercy. That's important, and we'll talk about that in a second. So Chedolaomer is one of his vassal lords that gains power after this dispersion, and Nimrod ends up becoming under him. Not everybody agrees that that's how it happened because according to the book of Jasher, which whether you believe that's canon or not, I think it's interesting in that we can learn from it. It refers to Nimrod as Amraphel, who we actually see in Genesis 14. Let's go ahead and jump into Genesis 14 to just give us a little bit more background to this story. It says, in those days, King Amraphel of Shinar, King Arioch of Elasar, King Chedolaomer of Elam, and King Tidal of Goyim waged war against King Bera of Sodom, King Birsha of Gomorrah, King Shenab of Admah, and King Shemeber of Zeboiim, as well as the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All of these came as allies to the Siddim Valley, that is, the Dead Sea. They were subject to Cateleamer for 12 years, but in the 13th year, they rebelled. In the 14th year, Chedolaomer and the kings who were with him came and defeated the Rephaim in Ashteroth Karnaim, the Zuzim in Ham, the Emim in Shaveh Kiriathaim, and the Horites in the mountains of Seir, as far as El Paran by the wilderness. Then they came back to invade En Mishpath, that is Kadesh, and they defeated the whole territory of the Amalekites as well as the Amorites who lived in Hazazon Tamar. You've got these 4 kings verses 5. The important thing to keep in mind with these 5 kings and their 5 cities are known as the Pentapolis. They are the 5 cities of the plain. You've got King Bera and King Birsha who were over Sodom and Gomorrah. But the interesting thing that you see here, it said the Rephaim and the Emim and the Zamzum, and I'm like, wait a minute, these are races of giants. So it looks like the 5 cities of the plains are races of giants. And it also mentions the Amalekites and the Amorites. The question is, are they races of giants as well? Well, according to Josephus, they were, right? Josephus actually talks about this same story, but adds the fact that they were giants as well, referring to the Amalekites and the Amorites. So it makes you really curious. Why are these 4 kings who are not giants fighting against these 5 kings that are, especially when it doesn't look like any of them are necessarily glorifying God? It's interesting because we talked about Chedolaomer, who was a vassal king to Amraphel or Nimrod, and Nimrod's in this war too. We can assume that Nimrod is Amraphel because it'd be very weird to think that Nimrod, as big a king as he was at that time, would not be involved in a world war of this caliber. So the question becomes, where did these giants come from? And was this war specifically an attack designed to annihilate the giants? We know that the sons of God came down, slept with the daughters of men, and they began to create all these different creatures. They began to experiment as well on a whole bunch of different creatures, 200 goats, 200 serpents, and create all these different monstrosities, right? That happened. It's still happening. But when you get to the book of giants, these giants and these creatures start to have dreams about their own destruction. There's a specific meeting that is had, and I believe we talked about this in a previous podcast, where you see individuals. You see Maui, you see Gilgamesh, who is there, who I believe was a dispossessed spirit who ended up possessing Nimrod post-Diluvian. That's my personal belief. But there's 2 other individuals here as well, and they are known as the sons of Shemyaza. They are Haya and Oya. Now, one of the things that was prophesied against them was that the watchers would have to watch their children die, and not only die, but they would have to watch them kill each other. So what does that mean? That means civil war. So fast forward, you go to a lot of these mythologies, you see the Titanomachy taking place where these monsters are killing one another. You even have stories like Hercules, Achilles, Jason the Argonaut. All of these are stories about heroes, still Nephilim characters, defeating other heroes / Nephilim characters. We place them as good versus bad, but they're all children of iniquity. They're all sons of pride, and they're all enemies of God. So they end up destroying each other, but not all of them die out during the flood. I know our tendency is to believe that all of them died during the flood, but the Bible never actually says that. I believe that others mutated so that they could survive in water. Be that as it may, one of the thought processes is that Haya and Oya either survived or they had sons that survived. There are certain versions of the book of giants where Haya and Oya are named as Augeas and Sihon, or Sihon and Og, that we see later in the Bible. Now that's a big deal. If they did indeed survive the flood, you can be sure that they have a hand in all the iniquity that's taking place in the land of Canaan, from the time they were in the flood until the time that they were finally defeated by Moses and the Israelites later on. You also get to, I believe it's Numbers chapter 24, when Balaam is trying to prophesy doom against the children of Israel, but he's prophesying success. He refers to the Kenites and says that they think that they're safe, but they will be destroyed as well. Well, who are the Kenites? The Kenites are the descendants of Cain. Well, how is it that descendants of Cain survived the flood if there weren't survivors from the flood? The Bible also says that the Amalekites were the first among the nations, but they are not listed in the table of nations until after Abraham's great grandson or something like that. They're obviously going to bide their time until they have the ability to build an empire of their own. Now, I don't know that it happened like this, but say it does happen like this. Canaan is cursed because of his sin against Noah, and he's on a trajectory that's going to lead him and all of his posterity into more wickedness. You also have Nimrod over here, who is not a descendant of Canaan, but he is a descendant of Cush, still in the lineage of Ham. If, in fact, Gilgamesh from before the flood ended up being dispossessed of his body, finds Nimrod and possesses him and becomes a king and builds up this world empire over here in the land of Shinar. So Nimrod / Gilgamesh is a world power over here. He's the first potentate, and he is building up civilizations to his own glory. Meanwhile, over here, you've got Og and Sihon, or whoever these other Nephilim are who survived the flood, that are starting to intermingle with the descendants of Canaan. You've got empires going on over here, but behind closed doors, you've got Nephilim at work, and you've got these races of giants that are starting to repopulate the earth. So all of a sudden, you've got a conflict between a dispossessed Nephilim over here in his empire, and other Nephilim over here that survived the flood in their empire. What do you have? Again, you have civil war, and they're fighting one another. Now, the problem is that this is a type of demonic possession that they had to be allowed. But over here, this intermingling, this sexual perversion that's taking place in places like Sodom and Gomorrah, because that's what's happening, you're getting genetically altered individuals, genetically altered beings, genetically altered Nephilim and giants that are coming out of what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. That's where these Rephaim are coming from. That's where these Amalekites and these Amorites and these Zuzim and these Emim are coming from. So now this civil war has to take place. God's judgment is still there. He still said that they were going to fight against each other and destroy one another. So once we look back at Genesis 14 again, it makes a little more sense. So you've got Bera of Sodom. Bera means son of evil, and Sodom means burning. Then you've got Bersha, means with iniquity. Gomorrah, which means submersion. Now, I don't know that I believe that Gomorrah and Sodom were their original names. I believe that that's the result of what happened to them. I don't believe that's what they were originally named. I believe that potentially Sodom was originally called Sodom, just like the war took place in the valley of Sodom or the Salt Sea. And then Sodom was just a play on words for what it had become. Shinab means splendor of the Father, and of Admah, which means red earth. Now that sounds like a really cool name because, you know, Ab or Abba, of course, means father. But when we look at the splendor part, the word there actually means change or alteration. And then you've got Admah, meaning red earth. So he is the father of altered earth. What does that mean? He's the father of genetically altered humanity. When I look at Shemeber, lofty flight of Zeboiim. And when you look at the word gazelles there, it says potentially a animal that is extinct or no longer around. I know we have animals that we call gazelles now, but sometimes I just can't help but wonder, is that just a shadow, right, of a reality that has been lost? When I think of lofty flight and it talks about its wingspan, I'm like, is it possible that Shemeber was not even human? Is it possible that this was a flying individual? Could this have been one of the creatures? Could he have been a flying gazelle of some kind? And a gazelle, could that have been a creature that we like, I don't know, but you can kind of see my train of thought. And if that's the case, it still lines up with the iniquity that's taking place in these cities. And then you've got Bela, whose name means destruction, of Zoar. In their names and in their titles, we can see the type of transgression that has to be completely stamped out. And so I believe that this campaign of these four kings is the judgment of God against these genetically altered creatures. Chedolaomer or Chedorlaomer. It means, in one version, it means handful of sheaves. But another version, Cateleamer means the servant of Lagomer. And Lagomer was an underworld goddess or deity who judged souls without mercy. So she was judgment without mercy. So Chedolaomer is a servant of judgment without mercy. And he's the king of Elam, which means eternity, right? So he represents the eternal judgment that these individuals are supposed to receive. You get to Tidal, king of nations, Tidal meaning fear, and that just translates to fear of the people. That could be a thing. Amraphel means sayer of darkness, or that could mean prophecies of doom, right? You've got Arioch of Eleazar. Arioch means lion-like. Eleazar means God is chastener. So when you think about the symbolism of God as a lion and God's correction coming as well. So you've got these four individuals, not quite the four horsemen that you see in Revelation, but you see these four kings bringing on the judgment of God towards these five kings of monstrosity. Something we have to keep in mind. Even though they are carrying out God's judgment, that doesn't mean that they are on good terms with God, because there were a lot of times when God would have an evil or wicked people to conquer Israel because of their wickedness, but then he would let them know, and don't laugh, your destruction is on the way as well. So God doesn't play favorites. So a lot of times when we've got disobedient people, God can orchestrate their judgment coming at the hands of one of their enemies, right? And so that's what I believe that you have here in the 4 Kings verses 5.